Nothing determines the character and inner core of a state like the willingness of its people to sacrifice themselves for the sake of a national idea. The public conscience, the volunteer movement, and volunteers at army recruitment centers in 2014 became the basis of Ukraine's national liberation war against Russia. The aggressor was not ready for this. I couldn't be mobilized because of my health. I had a broken back as a child. Therefore, I didn't serve in the army. There was only one way, to volunteer, and I started volunteering for the 93rd unit.
Через добровольців вже потім легалізувався і ми мобілізувалися в 93-й бригаді.
Yevhen Oleksenko was born in the city of Zaporizhzhya. It was here, starting from the 16th century, that the history of Ukrainian Cossacks won reaching victories began. However, Tsarist Russia, then the Communist Party, and the pro-Russian local authorities diligently erased these pages of history from the memory of Ukrainians. At the same time, they forced the Russian world and friendship with the northern neighbor on them. Moscow authorities came to this region earlier to exterminate the Ukrainian and the Crimean Tatar names. Moscow consistently worked with these territories. Fake stories about Novorossiya were invented, and Moscow sent people who did not have a historical memory of these territories there. Yevhen Oleksenko has understood since childhood who he was and what kind of country he lived in. At school, Yevhen joined the youth nationalist movement, which became the basis for resisting hired thugs called titushky during the Revolution of Dignity. Despite the numerical advantage of pro-Russian fringe groups, Oleksenko and his fellows held on to Zaporizhzhya. There were several fights and they lost them all. Then we held the regional council, guarded the security service of Ukraine building, city council and the army enlistment center. District departments were closed, barricaded, and they waited who would win. But when we won, they had nothing to do. Yevhen is a master of law by education. He combined his studies with regular physical activities. Oleksenko is a candidate for Master of Sports in powerlifting. However, when Russia went to war against Ukraine, he abandoned his career as a lawyer and championed ambitions and went to the front as a volunteer. At that moment, according to acting President Turchinov, only 5,000 soldiers were ready to carry out orders of the Kiev leadership. Back then, only volunteer movement could save Ukraine from the collapse and the occupant. Volunteers were mostly people of such professions as doctors, economists, teachers. It may seem that such people would never take up arms. But what is the historical memory about weapons? The memory about weapons is one of the mysteries of Ukrainians.
Пам'ять про зброю – це одна з загадок українців.
Zaporizhzhya resident Yevhen Oleksenko joined the armed forces of Ukraine as one of the fighters of the legendary 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade. This unit was involved in fierce battles for Donbas, Butivka Mine, Ilovaisk and Donetsk Airport. It was the airport's runway that had to be held, and Yevhen Oleksenko's unit played its part in this. In his unit, he directed the anti-tank grenade launcher. On Ukrainian Independence Day in 2015, the enemy led an assault with all its force and suffered heavy losses. Unfortunately, Yevhen was wounded during fighting. It wasn't supposed to be at that position. There were battles before each national holiday, and the fiercest battles took place on Independence Day. We rested a few kilometers from there, in the village of Vodyane, but I did not go there. When we returned, it was then that I was injured during a battle. A group of grenadiers led by Oleksenko was bombarded with 120-gauge mines and missiles. The patriot from Zaporizhzhya received a mine-explosive injury to his back and shrapnel wounds to the legs. All the fragments of shells are very dangerous. They are very hot, even stronger than bullet. And due to their large mass, they cause serious damage.
Вони наносять серйозні вражаючі такі пошкодження.
The stopping power increases. A bullet that hits at high speed, sometimes from a short distance, will pass through and most of the fragments will get stuck in the human body.
Більшість уламків застаріє в тілі людини.
Fortunately, unit commander Yevhen Oleksenko is a real officer. Risking his own life, he took the wounded from the battlefield to a military hospital in the city of Dnipro.
Він був на той час поруч і
He was close and he had a first aid kit, while we had at the time one kit for 5 of us. So if he had not been around, I wouldn't be alive. I'm fortunate, especially since they saved my leg. They took me away in a military car and they transported me to an ambulance.
Вони пересадили на іншу машину там і довезли до швидкої допомоги.
Doctors saved not only Yevhen's life, but also the functionality of all his limbs. The officer's young body adapted to new conditions. According to the soldier, the muscles that had been hardened through exercises with weights had no problem holding the body. However, the injured nerve endings of the leg created a certain amount of discomfort. So when Oleksenko left hospital, he did not go to the sanatorium, but to the gym so as to strengthen the muscular corset and build up his leg muscles. I really needed to recover, and those operations did not give much at that stage, so I staked on sports, and I rehabilitated the leg through sport. Well, I cannot say that everything turned out completely fine, but the leg is in much better condition than it was. Therapeutic physical training, then fully fledged training, and eventually I returned to tournament fighting. Yevhen Oleksenko resumes his career as a weightlifter and moves into event sport. In this classification, he reached the standard of Master of Sports of Ukraine and then learned about the Invictus Games, a kind of Olympic Games for wounded soldiers. Ukraine joined the number of participating countries at the beginning of 2017.
Не так просто отримати запрошення на ігри.
It's not that easy to get an invitation to the Invictus Games, and only teams and countries that are democratic and are fighting for democratic values are invited to this project. For those values of Western civilization which guarantee us freedom, security, rights and protection of our rights. Therefore, it is very important for us that Ukraine is perceived in this global society as such a country, and that is why we received an invitation to the Invictus Games in Toronto. The symbiosis of the character of an ambitious athlete, along with the spirit of an invincible soldier from the front line, clearly set priorities on Oleksenko's mind. Besides the program at the Invictus Games stakes in powerlifting, Oleksenko was selected for the Ukrainian national team at the Invictus Games. However, the board of coaches decided he would go to Toronto only as a reservist. Our team won 14 medals at the first games and returned to Ukraine triumphant. But the reserve status didn't enable Yevhen Oleksenko to back in glory. He set himself the goal of getting into the main team and spend nights in the gym. The national qualifiers for the 2018 national team lay ahead. Having worked very hard, the hero of our program compared himself to that Yevhen, who did not perform in Toronto.
Той був слабший.
Well, I was weaker before. That's the main difference.
Нічого не змінилося.
In the powerlifting at the Invictus Games in 2017, Oleksenko's result was 188 kilograms. A year later, in the national qualifiers, he pushed a weight of 190 kilograms and clearly outlined his own claims for a place in the national team. Respected experts note that he has made big progress. Besides the fact that Yevhen got good results, he can win prizes, that's for sure. I'm not talking about winning, but for prizes. Knowing the results, experience and perseverance of the hero of our program, a special commission included him in the Ukrainian team. He was one of 15 Ukrainians who performed at the Invictus Games 2018. Oleksenko worked hard at the training camp and eventually pushed a weight of 210 kilograms. Unfortunately, Yevhen got an injury, a torn muscle in the chest. But there was nowhere to retreat, as the Invictus Games in Sydney were ahead of him.
I found the way that Ukraine has embraced the Invictus spirit to be inspirational. The Invictus Games showcase the healing power of sport in helping wounded warriors recover from the injuries that they have suffered in the line of duty. In Ukraine's case, you will also have your official delegation and the 46,000-strong Australian-Ukrainian diaspora backing you all the way.
A small injury strongly undermined Oleksenko's self-confidence in his ability. Public excitement around our team grew with every day, and with it, the weight of responsibility on the weightlifter from Zaporizhzhya got heavier and heavier. "21 hours of flying and the Ukrainian team is at the other end of the world." At the Invictus Games in Canada last year, the local diaspora arranged an unforgettable performance for our team right at the airport. Australian Ukrainians also prepared a reception for their countrymen in advance.
Ще минулоріч вони їздили до Канади для того, щоб зрозуміти.
Last year, they traveled to Canada in order to understand how Canadian Ukrainians managed to organize strong support for our guys. They did everything to prove that the world in general, and Australians in particular, are also with them.
Таке саме натхнення, таку саму мотивацію, що світ і австралійці також із ними.
Our team worked hard right from the start of the competition. In the first 2 days, our cyclists and rowers won 3 medals for Ukraine. The next stage was powerlifting. First was Oleksenko's best friend from the team's camp, middleweight Yevhen. His result was a unanimous victory in a record for the Invictus Games. I worried about him more than about myself, because I joined his training regime, and we prepared for it all together. With a muscle injury, but with faith in his own strength, he set a new record at the very first attempt, 195 kilograms. Among the main competitors was the strong Martin Tai from the UK. The draw meant Oleksenko would perform before Tai. Therefore, his opponent would order several kilograms more and move ahead of the Ukrainian. The second and final, the third attempt from Oleksenko, also set a record of 205 pounds. Despite the injury, our soldier demonstrated his personal competition record and won the silver medal. Officially, this is my best result. Even though I was injured, I was able to show it. The battle was such that I didn't know how much I could really lift. But I tried, we fought to the end. I really like these competitions. A lot of viewers came, thousands, everyone liked it. According to the results of Invictus Games in Sydney, the Ukrainian team won a total of 20 awards in various denominations. But it is much more important that Oleksenko and our other heroes demonstrated to the whole world that despite all the consequences of this unfinished war, Ukraine is an undefeated state, and such high status cannot be measured by any medals. This is not a sporting competition. Rather, it is simply a method through sports, a competitive method for communication and social adaptation of veterans. Everything happens in a friendly atmosphere, and fierce competition isn't present here. Therefore, I would not want our boys, these undefeated Invictuses, to be seen as sportsmen. Athletes have their own way. They go towards titles for many years and from childhood, while undefeated soldiers are an example for many of our contemporaries and descendants to follow. The Invictus Games will take a vacation in 2019 and return in a year and a half. The organizers decided to stage the next Invictus Games in 2020 in the Netherlands. And by that time, the example of the hero of our program will have inspired hundreds of wounded soldiers to straighten their shoulders and challenge so-called passive veteranism, in order to stand on a par with those fighters whose will is really stronger than their bodies.